That doomsday clock they talk about was not designed in heaven. The time was set at 7 minutes to midnight and 47.
3 issues threaten life on Earth at the moment. Nuclear war, which is really very serious, more serious than the height of the Cold War. Global warming, which seems to have reached a tipping point. And nuclear power, not that it will end life on Earth, but it will change all species and human beings through genetic modification and sort of random compulsory genetic engineering from the radioactive waste. As a physician, I'm trained to understand diagnoses and the situation of the patient, and that during an emergency we practice triage. That one's hopeless, that one we can work on and probably save, and this one's probably okay. The planet at the moment is in the intensive care unit, and it's like a patient. The ozone layer is a skin protecting us from the ultraviolet light. The atmosphere regulates temperature control like the midbrain. The oceans and seas are the blood circulating through the planet, and the rock and stone, that's the bones of the planet, and the trees are the lungs of the earth. And all systems interact. So if you have a patient in the intensive care unit fairly stabilised with the heart in good shape, the electrolytes balanced, etc., one tiny issue can endanger that patient. If they get an infection, it may trigger a series of complications that induce heart failure, renal failure, liver failure, and that's called total organ collapse. It's very delicate, and that's the situation of the planet right now. So the threat of nuclear war is very profound, and should Russia and America launch their nuclear weapons targeted at each other, and Europe and China and Japan and Australia and Canada and America, huge fires will be created which will lift smoke into the stratosphere, blocking out the sun for up to 10 years, inducing a short ice age where everything and everyone will freeze to death in the dark. That's imminent, I have to say. No politician is talking about it in this election or anywhere else in the world, except Putin's talking about it, and so also is Castro, who's very deeply concerned. I can't get access to media to talk about this, to warn the ordinary people. So apart from ignorance, people are practicing psychic numbing, running around worrying about food and fashions and the like, when their very existence is threatened. And so we're like lemmings running towards a cliff of annihilation without really understanding what is going on. And as Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. That's always been my experience throughout my life. I've really led 3 revolutions. But at the moment, the media is uninterested. They want to sell their, quotes, products. They play Trump all the time, who sells lots of hemorrhoid cream and the like. And where the population and the mothers and fathers who care so much for their children and get their teeth straightened and make them white and have proper food and vitamins, their children have no future. So the dangers of nuclear power are long-term, not short-term. And each reactor makes about 30 tonnes of very, very radioactive waste a year, containing up to 150 radioactive elements, some of which have never been investigated from a biological perspective. And this waste must be stored isolated from the ecosphere for 1 million years, according to the EPA. And no container lasts longer than 100 years, be it concrete, steel, titanium, whatever. And they want to bury it deep in the earth. But, you know, we're talking about geological timeframes, 1 million years, ice ages, volcanoes, earthquakes, you name it. Who knows what's going to happen? And anyway, the waste is definitely going to leak out. And of course, when you put it in rock, there are fissures in the rock and there's water in the fissures, and the stuff will leak up to the surface into water which is used to water plants and vegetables and animals. And what happens is these isotopes, be it strontium-90, which causes bone cancer and leukemia, or cesium-137, which causes brain cancer, muscle cancer, ovarian cancer, you name it, and many others, concentrate hundreds to thousands of times at each step of the food chain. So first it concentrates in the algae by orders of magnitude, then in the crustaceans that eat the algae, then in the little fish, then the little big fish, and then us. And we stand at the apex of the pyramid of the food chain. So these elements concentrate most highly in us. And they last, some of them, for hundreds of years. And they deposit, like in the bone, and irradiate a very small number of cells. And one of those cells, or some of them, could have mutation in the regulatory gene that regulates the rate of cell division. And that cell will sit latent and dormant for any time from 5 to 70 years. And one day, instead of dividing in a regular way by mitosis to produce 2 cells, it goes crazy and produces trillions of daughter cells, and that's a cancer. And we can't stop the growth of cancer usually, and those cells are very disruptive and can infiltrate into lymph vessels or blood vessels and go up to the brain and the lungs, and that's called metastases, secondary cancer spreading throughout the body. So cancer is really a parasite, and you can see a body just dissipating as the cancer grows, and then when the body dies, so does the cancer die. We can cure some childhood cancers, occasionally adult cancers, but on the whole we can't cure cancer. So the dictum says if you can't cure a disease, you must prevent it. And here we have an industry that's going to induce not just cancer for the rest of time, and animals and plants get cancer too, like us, but random compulsory genetic engineering, as it will mutate genes in the eggs and sperm in us and animals to induce mutations that will cause abnormalities like dwarfism, diabetes, cystic fibrosis, phenylketonuria. I could name many, and there are 2,600 such genetic diseases. So it will produce a denigration of our genotype over the rest of time. So we're counterbalancing the positive aspects of evolution with negativity. That's if we survive. And that applies to animals and plants as well. They used to say the chance of one meltdown was like being struck by lightning in a parking lot. We've had 2 or 3. But then Fukushima happened, and there were 3 meltdowns in 3 large 1,000-megawatt reactors almost. I knew the 3 GE engineers who designed those reactors. They resigned in 1975 because they were too dangerous. They testified before Congress. Nothing was done. So we had an earthquake, we had a tsunami, we had destruction of the cooling system because each reactor requires 1 million gallons of water a minute to keep it cool. The external electricity supply was cut off, supplying the pumps. There were emergency diesel generators beneath the reactors. They got drowned by the tsunami. And so within hours, 3 nuclear cores of up to 100 tons of uranium each started melting because the fission products are so hot, E equals mc squared. It's that energy that Einstein said, energy equals the mass of the speed of light squared, by the speed of light squared. And so they started to melt like molten radioactive lava through the containment vessel, maybe into the ground. We don't really know where these cores are, and what's more, we'll never get rid of them or get them out, because if you go near any of them, a man would die. You know, he'd get such severe radiation within minutes. He'd die within days or weeks. So the situation is irredeemable. The reactors were built in front of a range of mountains, and water pours down from the mountains continuously beneath the reactors into the ocean, which was fine when the whole situation was intact. But now, with the molten cores in the ground, or near the ground, the water pours down from the mountains, taking with it huge amounts of radiation. So the water becomes radioactive waste as well. And every day since the accident, 400 tons of radioactive water have poured into the Pacific, and there's no end in sight. That's going to happen for, I guess, the rest of time. And so what happens is, although the Pacific is a huge body of water and dilution is good, as I explained previously, the solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious when it comes to radiation because of the reconcentration or bioconcentration at each step of the food chain. Already they're catching tuna off the coast of California that contain radioactive elements from Fukushima, and you might think, oh well, they're quite dilute in the flesh, but A, you can't taste, smell or see radiation in your food. B, you only need to eat some fish with a tiny amount of cesium, which then goes to the heart muscle, to a muscle in your body, to the brain, just a tiny amount, and that cesium stays there for a long time. Same with strontium-90, which is a calcium analogue, and goes to bone, irradiating cells for years. And so inevitably, over time, there will be a huge numbers of cancers induced by these radioactive elements that are leaking into the Pacific. Already the plume of radiation has hit the west coast of Canada and of America, and it's sliding down now past California to South America, and then it'll go over to Australia. And of course we live on the Pacific Ocean, I do, and we eat fish. So this is an absolute disaster. Apart from that, the Japanese government have lied about it right from the start. Abe, who's a very dangerous Prime Minister, got the Olympics for 2020, which will be operating in Tokyo. Tokyo is actually very radioactive. Parts of the soil in Tokyo and the moss on the roofs and stuff is so radioactive when tested. It would have to be buried in a radioactive waste dump in America if it was in America. It's so people in Tokyo are living in very high radioactive areas, and here are these lovely young athletes, very fit, trained all their lives, who will be exposed to radiation. Furthermore, you don't know what food you're eating there. In Fukushima, it was a very big rice growing area and peaches and all sorts of lovely stuff. And they've decided to now regrow rice in Fukushima and dilute it with non-radioactive rice. But you see that the solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious because it reconcentrates in the body. And they're selling it, Fukushima food in London and at various shows, and ignorant politicians are eating the stuff saying it's great. They have no idea about radiation biology. They're scientifically and medically illiterate. So there's a dreadful thing going on in the world. You know, we fight so hard to save a patient with cancer. We often fail. How many patients have I actually helped to die? And yet, here's an industry that will induce millions of cases of cancer and genetic disease and birth deformities for the rest of time. So, and there's been a big cover-up in America too. Hillary Clinton, bless her heart, I'm being cynical, signed an agreement with the Japanese just after Fukushima, saying that she would not inhibit Japanese food products to be brought into this country. I went to a sushi bar in New York fairly recently, and I said to the people, where does the fish come from? Oh, Japan. People are drinking their sakis and eating their fish, not knowing that, you know, they're eating cancer-causing elements. So there's been a huge cover-up, and the nuclear industry in America is extremely powerful. It interdigitates with the nuclear industry in America, in Japan, Toshiba and the other industries there. Japan makes nuclear reactor vessels and all sorts of stuff which it exports all over the world. So because there's a lot of money tied up, these people don't care. They know, but they don't care. So the future of our children and all descendants are at great risk. And they will say that nuclear power is clean and green. What the hell are they talking about? They're lying. And people shouldn't lie in science. I mean, if we lie in medicine, we'd be deregistered and dismissed. We'd be damaging or killing our patients. You must not lie in science. That's not only unethical, it's criminal. The only reason that people are not attending is it's not on the media. They're watching crap. Reality TV, it's all displacement activity. Don't think about reality. Reality TV is not reality. Don't think about what's really happening, and don't worry about the future for your children.
And is that part of what you mean by the psychic numbing?
Well, psychic numbing is practiced by people who understand the danger and they don't want to think about it. Most people, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Sixpack, have no idea. Your friends probably don't really understand. The other thing I want to say is that in Japan, they're only looking at thyroid cancer. Now, all cancers can be caused by radiation, and we know that from the studies from the A-bomb survivors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Already 172 children who are under the age of 18 at the time of the accident have developed thyroid cancer. The incidence in that population normally is 1 to 2 per million. And some of the cancers have metastasized, which means they've spread. And when you have your thyroid out, thyroidectomy, you have to take thyroid replacement every day for the rest of your life, like a diabetic has to take insulin. But they're not looking at any other cancers. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, is involved in covering this whole thing up. The Japanese doctors have been told they're not to tell their patients the symptoms are related to radiation. There are no surveys, medical surveys going on. The only really decent scientific work is being done by Professor Timothy Mousseau from the University of South Carolina, who's an evolutionary biologist. And he's been going into the exclusion zones of Fukushima and Chernobyl and looking at the birds and the animals and the plants and the insects. He's found that 40% of the birds have smaller than normal brain. No, 40% of the male birds are sterile. Most of the birds have smaller than normal brains, and you apply this data to humans, that because we're all the same biological systems. They have mutations for crooked wings, they're growing tumours, and this work is extremely important. It's pioneering work. He's risking his life by being in these highly radioactive zones. The birds have cataracts, which is what you get when you're exposed to radiation. And so this work is being published in very important journals, and it can upset the whole nuclear industry, which has specified levels of radiation which are okay. No level of radiation is okay. Each dose of radiation you get adds to your risk of getting cancer. Don't go through X-ray machines at the airports. Don't have unnecessary X-rays. Do not have CT scans unless you really need it, because you get a high dose. Children are 10 to 20 times more sensitive to radiation than adults. Little girls twice as much. We don't know why. Women are more sensitive. Fetuses are thousands of times more sensitive to radiation. So it's a heterogeneous population. The nuclear industry takes as its standard a 70-kilogram, 26-year-old white male. So we're in deep trouble. I'm a physician, and as a physician, one always tries to determine the prognosis or the outlook for a patient so that we can treat them in the appropriate way. So let's look at the problems facing the future of life on Earth, maybe the only life in the universe. One is global warming. We seem to have passed the tipping point of 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, which the scientists said is a tipping point beyond which there's no return. The permafrost is melting in the Arctic. That permafrost releases methane, which is 80 times more potent as a global warmer than CO2, and on and on. There could be a solution to this if only the politicians were not prostitutes to the oil and coal companies, and they pulled their fingers out of their proverbials and determined to stop burning coal, stop digging it up, make all cars electric cars powered by solar energy with solar panels on the roofs of every garage, solar panels on every house, windmills everywhere, employing hundreds of thousands, millions of people, increasing the GDP by an enormous amount. If they would do that, now, because we have an acute clinical emergency. There may be some hope. And only if America changes its tack will the rest of the world, because America, because of advertising and Madison Avenue propaganda it puts out to the rest of the world, has a huge influence. Only. And that means really an uprising of the people who don't really understand, because they're not really scientifically knowledgeable about this, to have a peaceful revolution. I don't know how that's going to happen. I've led a few revolutions. I'm nearly 80. I'm a bit tired now unless I had access to Fox TV and all the TVs in the country. We could change the people. I know that. I know how to do it. 1. 2, nuclear war. Yes, we can, if America took the lead to abolish its nuclear weapons, and I know Putin wants to do it, and if they do it together, they own, these two countries, 93% of the nuclear weapons in the world. Hydrogen bombs. These are the real terrorists, Russia and America, holding the world in nuclear ransom. And tonight, it could happen by accident, by computer error, by someone hacking into the early warning system of the Pentagon, by a mistake like a flock of geese setting off the early warning system, because the early warning system is set off by satellites picking up the reflection of the hydrogen bombs travelling through space. And a rising moon can set it off. Or by increasing international tension, which we're seeing now by America provoking Russia. How dare they? When Russia lost 27 million people in the Second World War, that's where the Second World War was won. And did they suffer? And how dare America now go up to the Russian borders and orchestrate a coup in the Ukraine and put in a man, Poroshenko, who's a wicked crook, working with Nazis in the Ukraine. How dare America accuse Russia of setting up a referendum in the Crimea where 97% of people voted to stay with Russia? Belonged to Catherine the Great. You know, it's been there forever. How dare America provoke Russia with Syria? In Syria, Russia's got the only warm water port in the Mediterranean. That's why they want to get rid of Assad. America does. These neocons in the State Department are fit to die. I say that, well, I shouldn't say that. They're fit to be tried as absolute war criminals and threatening life on the planet. Now, if America decides in its goodness, and most Americans are really good people, I know that because I mobilised 80% of them in the 80s to oppose nuclear war and nuclear weapons. When I first came here in 78, almost every American I talked to said it's better to be dead than red, and I thought these people are psychotic. So I organised Physicians for Social Responsibility, got 23,000 doctors involved. We educated people through the media and letters to the editor and symposia, dropping a bomb on Boston, describing the medical effects, you know, vaporization of people out to a mile, you know, burning of Boston, the whole thing. And people would say, geez, that's not good for us. And then the Catholic bishop said, I don't think Jesus would approve of this. And they wrote a pastoral letter opposing nuclear war. So did the Methodist bishops, the whole thing. So I know how to mobilise people, and you do it by educating them. And then they rise up and said, we won't have this. So what we need to do is for America to rise to its full moral and spiritual height and say, okay, we're going to save the planet. And we're going, but you see, we're probably going to elect Hillary, who's a warmonger. And she's close to these neocons in the State Department, Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan. I mean, these people are really, you'd have to say, sociopaths. They've got no moral conscience. Anyway, I'm just telling you, we can stop nuclear war, but, you know, just let's know it could occur tomorrow by accident or by design, by increasing international tension. On 9/11, the Air Force got the highest state of alert from DEFCON 5, 4, 3, 2. And the next stage was to press the button simply because no one knew what was going on. That's normal routine. So there's an incredible emergency about this. And the third thing is nuclear power. Well, we should absolutely stop making radioactive waste now. close down every reactor in the world, and then we're still stuck with the problem of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of tonnes of radioactive waste. No one knows where to put it. There you are. There are the solutions. Unless those three situations happen, you want to ask me the prognosis? Like I have to tell sometimes patients that they've got leukemia and their prognosis is 6 months, and help them with their grief. The prognosis isn't good, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, Fukushima, what have you done? You tried to control the power of the sun. And when the earth shook, it started a war. Death floats in the air and it washes ashore.